we knew it would happen sooner or later. The lawyers have been in touch. Fortunately, one of them's this week's guest. Welcome to episode 12.
This is Partners in Crime with Adam Croft and Robert Dawes.
A very exciting episode this week, Bob, for numerous reasons. Not only the fact that the guest is someone I've been trying to get on for ages, someone I've been talking about a lot.
You have a great deal, and I'm very glad I listened to you, I have to say.
Yeah, and also because if by the time this episode goes out, by the time people are listening to it, we'll be up in Scarborough on the beach for Books by the Beach.
We will be in Yorkshire by the seaside, ozone in our nostrils, salty air surrounding us.
Ozone in our nostrils and beer in our bellies.
Yeah, well, half a shandy for me, of course.
Absolutely, naturally. Got to stay professional.
Yes, Books by the Beach, that's where we'll be, and that's where we'll be broadcasting from. So we're looking forward to that this weekend.
Yeah, and next week's episode should be entirely recorded from the Books by the Beach Festival. We're hoping to actually record on the beach, if possible, but we'll see how that goes, weather and technology dependent.
Well, yes, we'll fight off the elements and any other rude noises that...
Elephants?
Did I say elephants?
No, you didn't.
I meant elements. And any other rude noises we hear along the way.
This week I've been doing a little bit more reading. I've managed to get about halfway through another book. I've been reading a book by Harlan Coben called The Stranger. He's a very good writer, isn't he? He's very immediate.
He's splendid. I mean, very vivid, very full of energy and detail. I love his books. And actual fact, I think one was adapted into a series on British television last year. I'm afraid the name escapes me.
Yeah, well, The Stranger's it's brilliant. It seems to be that there's this person that's known only as The Stranger, who knows a select handful of people's deepest, darkest secrets, and seems to get some kind of kick out of exposing those secrets to their nearest and dearest, and completely turning their lives upside down. It's I'm still not entirely sure where it's going, but it's an absolutely
that's
fascinating
the trick
read.
of a good writer, isn't it? The craft and art of a good writer.
Indeed.
Always keep your reader guessing.
Have you had a little more time than me to get some reading done this week?
Oh, absolutely not. What are you talking about? No time at all. It's the school holidays. So I have been a taxi service, general concierge for all things that my wonderful children want. I say children, they're teenagers now. And so I haven't known whether I'm coming or going. But so I am visiting an old favourite for my recommendation this week, which is a book by Val McDermid. Well, there we are. We all love and adore Val McDermid's work, but this one is called Forensics, the Anatomy of a Crime. And I'll just read you a little bit from the back of it to give you some idea of why I'm recommending this. It's sort of a guidebook to forensics, and probably the best there is. Now, in her novels, Val McDermid has been solving complex crimes and confronting unimaginable evil for years. Now she's taking a look at the people who do it for real, the forensic scientists who can unlock apparent mysteries and help deliver justice thanks to their ability to read the messages left by a corpse, a crime scene, or the faintest of human hearts. Drawing on interviews with top-level professionals, groundbreaking research, and her own experience, McDermid lays bare the secrets of these fascinating specialists. We learn how maggots can point to the time of death. We discover how a DNA trace, a millionth the size of a grain of salt, can be used to convict a killer. We realise how hard it is to erase our digital footprints. It's a journey that takes you to war zones, fire scenes and autopsy suites and brings us into contact with extraordinary bravery and wickedness as McDermid traces the history of forensics from its earliest beginnings to the cutting-edge science of tomorrow. As a writer myself, it's pretty much my Bible. It's a brilliantly researched and vividly brought together book with Val McDermid's own particular wonderful style encompassing the whole thing. In actual fact, there was a marvellous exhibition at the Wellcome Collection in London called Forensics, which is where the book has actually come from.
Last year or the year before, wasn't it?
It was the year before last. I went to it, and it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating, as is the book. So whether you're a great reader of crime fiction, that's why you're listening to this podcast, or whether you're a writer at any level in the experience, from beginner to getting started to successful writer, if you are, you've probably got it already. It's the Bible of forensics. So if you haven't already got it, go get it.
Yeah, it's one that I've read, and it is fascinating, not only as a writer, but as a reader of crime fiction as well, and seeing the background of how things are actually put together, and from a forensics point of view, it makes for fascinating reading. So.
And for the more unkind listener, if such a person exists, it will allow you to catch us out at our craft and trade.
Yes, you can see the bits where we've let story win out.
He got that wrong.
I hear that enough. I don't need to hear that anymore. Yes, our guest this week is Gillian McAllister, best-selling author of psychological thrillers, Everything But the Truth and Anything You Do Say, which I've been harping on about for weeks. I think she's absolutely fantastic, and I'm delighted that we've managed to get her on the show today. So we're going to be grilling her about her books, about her life as a lawyer, and her unique style of structuring books. But first, please do feel free to get in contact with us if you've got a guest that you want to suggest to have on the show. We take all of your suggestions very seriously, and a number of the guests we've had have been people that have been requested by listeners. You can email hello@partnersincrime.online. We're on Twitter @CrimeFicPodcast. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/partnersincrime podcast. This podcast is very gratefully sponsored by the fantastic folk over at Kobo. They've got more than 5 million titles available on their shop. You don't need an e-reader or a special device to read the books from Kobo either. Whatever you're listening to us on now, you can read the books on, and they've got a free mobile app as well for your smartphone or for your tablet, and you can get 90% off of your first ebook at Kobo. Just pick your poison and enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout. Gillian McAllister is an author of 2 psychological thrillers. Everything But the Truth, her debut novel, which came out with Penguin in March 2017 and was a Sunday Times top 10 bestseller, and Anything You Do Say followed in ebook in October 2017 and in paperback in January 2018. Now, Gillian, when I was doing a bit of preparation for this interview, I had a look on your website, and amongst other things, it says that you have a very orange cat, which I do. I have a bright orange one. You like reading books in bed while it rains, which is obviously a given. Taking baths so hot they turn your skin pink, which is something I do on a regular basis. And how you get your ideas for novels, which is the what if moments, which is how I get mine too. So it seems we've got a lot in common. But
we do have a lot in common.
The similarities seem to end there, because you've been extraordinarily successful. Anything You Do Say has been my book of the year so far.
That's kind.
Well, I'll for anyone who doesn't know about it, and I have spoken about it on the podcast a couple of times before, I'll read a bit of the blurb here. It says, "It's the end of the night. You're walking home on your own. Then you hear the sound every woman dreads. Footsteps behind you, coming fast. You're sure it's him, the man from the bar who wouldn't leave you alone. You make a snap decision. You turn, you push. Your pursuer tumbles down the steps. He lies motionless, face down on the floor. Now what?" Now, the book's written with such an innovative structure. It leads to this event where he tumbles down the steps, and it splits off into 2 alternate timelines, each of which follows a different decision that is made at that point. I mean, how did that structure come about?
Well, all my novels have kind of innovative structures. It's kind of one of my things. But that one in particular, I'd wanted to write in the trend of a sliding doors novel for ages, and I just couldn't think of an angle. I had like a women's fiction idea in mind about a woman whose husband does and doesn't die, and it follows the kind of aftermath of being widowed or staying in a marriage that's not especially happy. I thought that would be quite interesting, but it wasn't very crimey. And so I actually had the idea. I woke up in the middle of the night and had the idea of the split-second decision of whether or not you hand yourself in when you've committed a crime. So it actually came out of nowhere, really, is the honest answer, which is a thing I find frustrating, because when you're trying to have an idea, it's almost impossible because there's no real process to follow. But yeah, it came in the middle of the night.
As the best ideas sometimes do.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, you're also a lawyer. You practice in Birmingham, so I'm guessing there must have been large aspects of that which help, because this is a book which very much kind of has the background of law, and you know what happens, what process somebody goes through after a crime happens, depending on whether they stick around or run. I'm guessing that must have had quite an impact on your decision to write that subject matter.
Yeah, I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I do real estate investment work. So
Close enough.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no, I don't really. I had a lot of help with the police procedure, but I suppose I do kind of write legal thrillers, and I have access to how to find out the information. And I think what's common to a lot of lawyers is we read and discuss things that are in the news. So the recent Charlie Gard case at Great Ormond Street, I talked about with my boyfriend who's a lawyer, and lawyers often have pretty interesting and quite smart takes on things like that. And I think the constant exposure to stuff like that made me realise, like, there's a lot of toing and froing about whether my protagonist in Anything You Do Say acted in self-defence, and that sprung out of a conversation we had recently about what is reasonable force, and if you make a mistake about who's following you, can you really sort of transfer that? If it was an honest mistake, can you sort of say, well, I thought I was being followed by this person, but actually it was this other person? Can you really do that legally speaking? So yeah, there are a lot of illegal elements and sort of grey areas.
Apologise for Bob's phone going off there.
That's fine, don't worry.
I thought I had that covered, but clearly I haven't.
Well, you get nothing but professionalism on this podcast.
No, it is. It's my wife. I'll just take one. Sorry for that.
No, that's fine, don't worry.
That's a fiver in the kitty here.
I was going to say it's quite interesting how the book does diverge off at that point and comes back together a number of times with events that happen in both timelines, and how it impacts people differently or the same depending on which timeline you're looking at the time. That was something that, and that must have been something that you had kind of planned from the start. The fact that they, even though the turn of events makes things go two different ways, in a way you can never really escape what happened. That was kind of what I got from the book, that there is no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say. And I think in the version where Joanna calls 999, she sort of outsources her guilt to the justice system, and she trusts in that process, and she actually feels quite hard done by. Whereas in the Conceal timeline, where she is sort of on the run, she feels the weight of guilt around her because she doesn't have that structure in place. And I wanted to kind of play off the role that societal justice plays in offending, really. And yeah, like you say, there's a death in it that happens in both timelines late on in the book. And then there's like some of her friends and family make different decisions because they know someone who's either going through the justice system or who is pulling back from them and is keeping a secret from them. And I think I wanted to show that kind of ripple effect, that lots of things change, but also there's some sort of fatalism in there, that some things are going to happen to you no matter what's going on, no matter like how bad things get. Some life events are still going to befall you.
I think, like all good crime, it's a fantastic social commentary as well, because as you say, some things do happen anyway, and at the end of the book, we very much get the impression that there wasn't a right thing to have done or not done. Whatever happens, you're going to either live with this immense guilt or have some form of punishment. I think as a society, perhaps we're sometimes too hung up on whether people, in inverted commas, get away with it. So I don't know if you thought the same when you were writing it, but do you ever really get away with a crime? Yeah,
that's totally. I mean, I think looking back, it's quite a political book. It's definitely got feminism at the heart of it. It also has a race kind of storyline. But yeah, I do think often society and maybe like the media are kind of, they want somebody to go down for something. But actually, with what happens to Joanna, it was just a set of totally unique circumstances. She's never going to harm anyone again. And I kind of did want to raise the question of what use is prison? You kind of end up, you ruin one person's life, the victim, but you also ruin the perpetrator's life, really, because she is never the same again following that. But also I wanted to present the flip side of that, which is what's the alternative? And she suffered probably more in the storyline where she doesn't hand herself in. And I don't think there really is an alternative to going through the justice system either. So I kind of wanted to present the problem, really.
Gillian, I've always been fascinated by the idea of different time places and parallel lives and whatever. I was chatting to an astrophysicist over the weekend, quite by chance and quite unexpectedly on my part, and he surprised me by saying that there is a growing amount of scientific thought that suggests that parallel lives to some degree within the universe might exist, which I couldn't believe. I said, this is science fiction. And as he pointed out very, very swiftly, he said, well, science fiction very often becomes science fact. Where did you get your interest in this parallel life sort of structure that you used? Do you have any writers or any films that you've seen that you drew from to confirm that it was an area that you wanted to explore?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it kind of is almost speculative fiction, which is not my genre at all. And my third novel is it's a courtroom drama, actually. So it's back in the crime box fully. I suppose, obviously, Sliding Doors is really the pioneer of that. I looked it up, actually, because I think it genuinely was the first parallel narrative like film or book. But also Lionel Shriver, who wrote We Need to Talk About Kevin, after that she wrote a book called The Post-Birthday Worlds, which was extremely influential to me. He thought it was almost as good as We Need to Talk About Kevin, and kind of went very much under the radar, really. And that book kind of does similar. It shows the contrasting similar and different days that follow a big event in the protagonist's life. But the way she does it, she has 2 chapter 2s and 2 chapter 3s and so on.
I see.
But yeah, it's really accomplished. I would definitely recommend anyone who enjoys the Sliding Doors kind of narrative to read it.
Well, fortunately, we're at Scarborough, books by the beach at the weekend, and Lionel Shriver is one of the speakers. So we're going to be having hopefully a little chat with her, and certainly buying that book. Thanks for the recommendation.
And all things going well, technically speaking, we that should be next week's episode. Should be an outside broadcast from the Scarborough Books on the Beach Festival. So we can hopefully speak to Lionel Shriver about that book, and we can kind of tie in with this episode. That'd be quite fun.
Yeah, it's a really super book. It's women's fiction. It's about a woman who does or doesn't kiss her husband's best friend when he's away, which is not at all like We Need to Talk About Kevin, but it has the same kind of menacing kind of tone to it. It's really good.
Okay, I'll give it a go.
I would recommend.
You mentioned a third book coming out, which I got very excited about. You said as much as it's a courtroom drama. Can you tell us anything else about the third book?
Yes, so it's coming out in July on ebook and October in paperback. It's called No Further Questions, and it is about 2 sisters, one of whom is looking after the other's child when it dies overnight, and the auntie is accused of murder. And it's the trial that determines both sisters' fates. So it's a closed-set thriller. It takes place over a 5-day trial, and the innovative structure is that there are 10 witnesses, and each time a witness takes the stand to talk about an element of the crime that they saw or overheard, they get their own chapter in their own voice. So it's almost told in flashbacks to get it out of the courtroom, which is born out of a problem I had, which was I don't want to tell a book entirely in legal evidence because I just think the reader would get frustrated. So each witness kind of has like a vignette of they were going about their day and then they saw this thing which may or may not have been innocuous, and then they get cross-examined on it, and then you move on to the next witness.
Well, it sounds absolutely brilliant. That's out in ebook in July, you say?
Yes, July the 2nd.
Fantastic.
Now, being a lawyer and whatever, what are your thoughts on this runaway success, The Secret Barrister? Do you know anything about that that's hit the bookshops recently?
No, I haven't read it yet.
No, I haven't. It sounds fascinating, though, I must admit.
Yeah, it does. And there's been a lot of change recently with legal funding in particular, and criminal barristers are very concerned about it. So I would definitely be interested to read it. But yeah, I haven't yet. I've got a stack of proofs like a mile high.
I mean, with these kind of what ifs, the way that you tend to generate your stories from, in a similar way to that I do, do you find that gives you a kind of a big bank of ideas? Have you got numerous different kind of ideas in your mind and potential books for the future, or do you find that a bit of a struggle sometimes?
I do have quite a lot. What I find a struggle is turning a what if into a novel. So the what if you commit a crime on the way home from your night out, and then you have a sliding doors narrative. That was a fully formed novel idea. I knew what to do with it, and I knew that in the reveal strand, Joanna would go to trial, and in the conceal strand, she would try and get away with it, and it would all unravel. But what I have about 8 ideas on a note on my phone, but a lot of them I do think, interesting dilemma, and what actually happens. And I do think the longer you're in the game, the harder that gets, because you kind of have done, I've done a book about the slippery slope, which was everything but the truth, and I've done a courtroom drama, and I've done a book about someone trying to cover up a crime, and I think it's harder to take an interesting kind of angle on a what if. So I definitely do struggle.
I think you get harder on yourself as well. The more that time goes on, and you raise your own standards internally, and you try to kind of make sure that each idea kind of matches up to what you've done before as well. So yeah, it does get harder as you go on. It's a very strange thing.
Have you ever started a book and not finished it? This is a question we ask a few writers to see whether that's the case, or do you know fairly early doors whether something's got legs?
I've never junked a book, but I did have a book that I was signed on that my agent couldn't sell. And then I wrote Everything But the Truth, which did sell. But yeah, I've never junked a book. I'm quite tenacious if I have a good hook. I've struggled quite a lot with my 4th book, but I believe in the hook. So I'm married to it until I figure it out, pretty much.
So you're already on book 4.
Yeah, so book 4 is deliverable this September. So I am in the throes of the absolute worst bit, where I'm at 70,000 words, but it's just a mess.
2/3 of the way through when you start to hit that wall.
Yeah, and you start to get the kind of the bad idea bears about, wouldn't it be good to just write a book about something else completely? And because this one also has an innovative structure that I've got wall charts because it's so complicated, but I'm kind of coming out the other side. I've just had a 2-week break, and I've thought about it a lot, and I've kind of made lists of things that I'm going to change in the next draft, and I feel like I'm kind of coming out of the forest now slightly.
Is that a book you can tell us anything about, or is it still too early?
Yeah, no, I can. So
Brilliant.
the hook is when my heroine was 17, her father murdered her mother. And 20 years later, he gets out after serving life in prison, and he tells her he didn't do it. So that's the hook. And the structure is that he takes her through each piece of evidence that convicted him, and you get his memory of what he says really happened, and you get my heroine's memory, a little bit like The Affair. I don't know if you've seen that, where you have memories of the same event that slightly differ. And it's about whether he's guilty or not, but slowly the reader starts to see that there are things in the memories that don't add up, and perhaps they might indicate something else was going on entirely. It's
a big thing, isn't it? The kind of the power of memory. It's something that a lot of writers do kind of dive into.
Yeah. And I think the memory so the father has been in prison for 20 years, so he has a completely different lens on it to the daughter, who also, the trial happened during a very formative time of her life, and there was a media circus, and so she views everything through the lens that her father's a monster, and he's kind of battling against that. So yeah, it is the memory and the nostalgia and the kind of bias that you have on your own memories is what I'm trying to write about. But in a rather heavy-handed first draft kind of way at the moment.
It's fascinating how we all look at life through a different lens. I mean, that's something that, I mean, I'm a big fan of Harold Pinter, and that's something that he did a few times in his plays, looking at how people perceive events differently, whether things actually happened. A lot of it is driven by our emotions rather than just remembering that the things as they actually happened. You might have seen, a look that somebody gives you and interpreted it completely different to the way it was meant, and that then kind of other things build off of that. It's a really fascinating thing, and it's I think it's testament to your writing, really, that you've got these much deeper subjects that are focused on rather than just a crime. There's a lot of kind of social and political commentary in there too.
Yeah, I do like to have a few. I mean, I did an English degree, and you seem quite literary also to me. I don't know if you've also done that, and it's another thing we can.
I've heard of Harold Pinter. That's about it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I do like to have a kind of another level to it. And I think, like Everything But the Truth was ostensibly about a man who'd done something in his past that he'd then hidden, but it was also about how far you can trust someone when they've breached it, even if they've stopped lying to you, if you no longer trust them. It's kind of all over. So yeah, I kind of like to do it multi-level, but it makes the writing complicated. And I think it means that you have to do more drafts than the average person, because I might do a draft where I get the bones of the plot down, and then I get a draft where I flesh out the characters, and then I have to do a draft where I really look at the memories and what I'm trying to say about that. So it makes the process quite inefficient, I do find.
Are those messages there in your mind before you start writing then, or are they things that kind of come out as you're writing the book? You kind of realise there's a bit of a deeper meaning there?
I don't really know. I think I'm drawn to subject matters that I know will interest me. Like, I wouldn't have said I was interested in the notion of memory, but I must be, because I came up with that structure. And then I find the more I write about it, the more things I find in there that I want to explore and unpick.
So it's all a process of discovery for you as well, not just the reader.
Yeah, no, it totally is. It totally is. And that's why, like, a book takes me 10 months, and I really struggle to get it anywhere under that, because it's the old archaeology that Stephen King talked about. You're just discovering the book for yourself, aren't you?
Do you find, Gillian, that the discipline and forensic scrutiny that you have to apply to your work as a lawyer has been greatly helpful to your career as a writer?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. The graft that you have to have as a lawyer is, I apply it completely. Like, there's no, it's not an analogy at all. It's the same, really. So when I was a newly qualified lawyer when I sold my novel to Penguin. So suddenly I had a 2-book deal and a year to deliver. So I just kind of did what I do at work, which is, well, I'm going to do this today and this tomorrow and this the next day. And I decided I would do 1,000 words a day. And then once it was done, I would edit 3,000 words a day, and like a prose edit. And I kind of did it come like rain or shine. I did it in train station with gloves on. If my train was delayed, I did it in coffee shops in the morning. And, even if I ran a bath, I would write while it ran. Like, I shoehorned it in everywhere.
It's one of these red hot baths you have.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like pretty much every day. So I'm not too deprived of time, to be honest. The amount of time I spend in the bath is obscene.
I know the feeling.
So I mean, the hard graft of writing is something which you obviously embrace, and something that your past. You've studied English, you practice law. These things have sort of really set up the paradigm for you to actually follow the structure of how you write your work and translate your extraordinary ideas into books. So it's interesting, because we'll be interviewing another lawyer in a few months' time, and he says the same sort of thing. He finds that the way he has had to work over decades, is much older than you, has really informed the discipline and his approach to his writing, which means, if nothing else, the book gets done.
Well, you have to, I think, don't you? I mean, I'm quite similar in my approach. I always say that I'm very lucky to be able to do what I do for a living, and nobody else in any other job can decide that they're not, they don't feel inspired to do their job that day, or they'd rather go and do something else. I don't think that we as writers should have that luxury either. We're very, very fortunate to be able to do what we love doing and do it from home. That's kind of my...
Totally.
Yeah,
He is a dog.
please don't ask me to. I'm not going to ask you to represent me in court, or vice versa. I mean, yes, I just find that whole process fascinating, and also the area which you go into, time and parallel universe. I mean, like, one of my great favourites is J.B. Priestley, and I think he was a visionary, literary visionary, and the way he played with structure and time in his plays and his books was well ahead of its time. And it sounds as if you're in a very similar territory.
Blimey, thank you.
It does. I mean, you're doing things in a very different manner. It's not the standard psychological murder mystery or psychological thriller that you're writing. You're actually playing with the form and structure of it as well to tell your stories and bring your characters alive. So I, for one, am deeply, deeply looking forward to reading all your books.
Thank you.
Well, as I've said before many times, it's been my book of the year so far. Anything You Do Say, and Everything But the Truth as well. I absolutely loved, and I can't wait for book 3, the courtroom drama. No Further Questions. You said that was called.
Yes. I will try and get you a proof.
Oh wow, even better. So that's out in July in ebook, and your 4th book will be what, next year, we presume.
Yeah, it will be next year. It might be spring on ebook. It depends how fast I deliver it, really, and how much work it needs.
Do you have a title yet?
It's called Beyond Reasonable Doubt.
Beyond Reasonable Doubt. I like these. I like the themes of your titles. They're very legal things.
I'm running out of legal maxims. So
I'll try and think of some more for you.
So I need some.
I'll try and think of some more for you.
Yeah, do.
Gillian, thank you very, very much for joining us today. It's been fascinating talking to you.
Thanks very much, Gillian. It's been a joy. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you both.
Gillian's books are all available on Kobo, or both available. There's only 2 at the moment, so why not give them a go? If you've not bought a book from Kobo before, you can get 90% off of your first book. Just go to kobo.com, pick one of the books that are for sale there. We recommend Gillian's, of course, and enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout, and that will be your very first Kobo ebook with 90% off. You don't need a special e-reader or device. You can read them on your mobile or your tablet with the free Kobo app. Now, Bob, all of our interviews are fascinating. I say it after every interview, but that one in particular obviously was great for me because I love Gillian's books, and it was a unique take on how books are put together and on her writing process, which I particularly enjoyed.
Well, no ordinary crime writer. She, quite clearly, and as we mentioned in the interview, she's actually looking at the whole form and structure of telling her stories and finding intriguing and ingenious ways in which to bring her characters and their relationships and their dilemmas to life. And as you say, very vividly in the books that she's writing, I found her absolutely fascinating. Really. A great interview, and I hope everyone listening to this did as well. I am going to, as I said, buy that book, and if I had my 90% discount still available to me on Kobo, I'd be using it on Gillian's first book.
Absolutely. It's just absolutely brilliant to hear from her, and the fact that she's got 2 more books coming out as well is what I got particularly excited about.
Yes, and, you did. He was sort of. No one needs to see Adam excited on mic.
The idea of a pre-publication proof as well.
Yes, you see, he's shivering with excitement. I understand why now, of course, but there we are.
Well, hopefully it'll be something to read on the beach in Scarborough next week.
Oh, yes.
In between pubs.
Yes, sitting on your deck chair between donkey rides.
That's it, yes. If you have any suggestions for people you'd like to hear from on the show, it can be authors, it can be people from the TV crime world, it can be absolutely anybody connected with crime, preferably not criminals. You can email us hello@partnersincrime.online. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/Partners in Crime Podcast, or we are on Twitter @CrimeFicPodcast. And as we were saying earlier, we are going to be broadcasting from Scarborough next week.
Yes, I've knotted my handkerchief and I have my wellies, and I'm looking forward to. We're going with the children again. Teenagers? What am I talking about? I live so much in the past. So we're revisiting that place, so we'll tell you far more about it. It's a place that I hold very dear, Scarborough. I spent a lot of my, many years working there.
When you were working on the donkey rides?
When I was working on the donkey rides, helping out with the donkey rides. Actually, I'm a great maker of candy floss.
Are you?
Not many people really interested in knowing that at all.
Well, we assumed you must have some talents hidden somewhere.
Well, that's thanks for the assumption. But with all assumptions, there are no guarantees.
The weather's meant to be nice, he says, looking out of his window as we record this episode at horrible grey skies and rain kind of trickling down.
It'll be perfect. It'll be a perfect spring weekend.
Well, I'm hoping that next time you hear from us, we'll be doing the introduction to episode, what will that be, episode 13. Well, there you go. That sounds a death knell, doesn't it? We're going up on Friday the 13th, and it's episode 13. I'm hoping the weather's going to be nice.
I think that's in keeping. This is Crime Fiction Podcast, after all. But anyway, anyone in the Scarborough area who wants to come along, I'm doing a little chat with Hugh Fraser and George Costigan on Sunday afternoon, but there are many other people there. Stella Rimington is appearing.
Got a list of crime people here. Got Lionel Shriver, I suppose he's kind of crimey, Robert Goddard, Denise Mina, Stella Rimington, Hugh Fraser, and some bloke called Robert Dawes, who I've not heard of.
And Jeremy Vine's popping in as well.
Yes, Jeremy Vine.
Ruth Jones?
Yes.
Stella's Ruth Jones is going to be there as well. So it's a great festival. So come along. You don't have to come and listen to me at all. You've probably heard enough of me over the last few weeks if you're listening to these podcasts, but there's plenty there for everyone if you're in the Scarborough area. If you happen to be in Alaska or other parts of the world and can't quite make it, we do understand.
Yes. So it's a long way to come from Alaska, isn't it?
I forget these podcasts are international.
Yes, we've got 2 listeners in Macedonia, don't you know?
Have we?
We have indeed.
We can't walk the streets in Macedonia.
No, we can't. No, but so with any luck, this time next week you'll be hearing from us on the beach in Scarborough. And on that note, I'm off to apply my suntan lotion and knot my hanky and pack my bag.
Yes, and I'm not going to stay around and watch that.
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft and Robert Dawes and produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Beisch. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.